Hello and welcome to the Northwest Hospitality Leadership Podcast. Today's broadcast is brought to you by U.S. Bank. Click the link below to learn about U.S. Bank's credit card processing solutions. Thank you for sponsoring this podcast. During today's discussion, Washington Hospitality Association President and CEO Anthony Anton is joined by Tina Patel, Managing Director of Alko Hotels in Eugene and Beaverton, Oregon, and Carla Barajas, owner-operator of Azteca restaurants in Spokane, Washington. With them is Chris Jenson, a consultant with Table Group. Today, we'll talk about the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, with an emphasis on trust. We hope you enjoy.
We're back for our 7th Northwest Hospitality Leadership Podcast. Can you believe we've been doing that here? Coming on.
Exciting.
Welcome, Chris, from the Table Group. He has been our great partner in walking us through a lot of leadership concepts as the industry faces a new era and is going to take a better and stronger leadership to help us get through that. And today's leadership podcast, we are excited to welcome two of the great Northwest hospitality leaders. Let's start with Tina Patel from Alko Hotels in Eugene and Beaverton. Tina, welcome joining us today. We're so excited to have you. And my counterpart in Oregon has continually bragged about getting to work with you and your family and your company. And so we're humbled that you took the time to share your leadership with us today. And then in my corner of the world up here in Washington, I'm excited to welcome Carla Barajas from Azteca Restaurants in Spokane. Carla has been both on the association board and the leader of the Spokane chapter at different times, and just one of the all-around great people I've gotten to work with. And Carla, thanks again for taking your time and being here today. And we look forward to your insights on leadership. We are coming back to 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which if you listened last month, you'll hear is my go-to leadership book. It's one of my favorites. And Chris, for those who didn't get a chance to listen to the previous podcast, can you give a quick overview of why 5 dysfunctions of a team is so important in today's operations?
Yeah, I think teamwork is a increasingly important competitive advantage for any organization. Because really what we're talking about when we talk about teamwork, which is what the 5 dysfunctions of a team is about, is understanding that how our people work together has a direct effect on our ability to serve customers, perform as a business, and be effective. And the book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which is written in the negative to identify what are some of the 5 key pitfalls or problems that teams face that undermine their effectiveness, it's critical for us to understand what those 5 things are and to be able to recognize them in the workplace and work on them. And so things like our ability to trust one another and be open with each other, our ability to embrace conflict and not avoid conflict, but be able to tackle the difficult issues head on, the ability to let go of conflict and commit wholeheartedly to whatever decisions are in the best interest of the organization, and then hold each other accountable to those decisions, and overcoming the temptation we all face to defer accountability to the manager only and not embrace peer-to-peer accountability as something that helps us, better serve our customers or clients and be effective as an organization, all with the intention of prioritizing collective results over and above my own status, ego, or ambition, but really thinking like a true team, whether it's like a sport team, like a football team, or any type of competitive team. Even at work, can we think about how do we have the greatest effect on what will produce the best outcome for the greater good rather than for myself? So when those 5 things are in place for an organization, that's a strategic advantage. In addition to any other strategy you would have in your business, getting our people to work together has a real effect on the performance of the business. And it's more important these days than ever before, when information and what we call organizational smarts is becoming easily accessible through the internet. Anybody can find out what another business does and copy it, but can you execute better than your competitors? And that's what the 5 dysfunctions of a team is all about.
Well, and I think it's like, what anniversary did I hear on?
25 years.
25 years ago. And And so Tina, welcome to the podcast. Tina Patel with Alko Hotels in Eugene and Beaverton, and we're so excited to have you and your leadership here today. Um, this book's 25 years old, but when you read it, did you feel like it still applied to you
Oh,
today?
sure.
Give us your first impression.
Thank you for having me on the podcast. I didn't read the book before, and I can't believe it's been out for 25 years. So but it was eye opening because I do use those practice somewhat, in our hotels. But there was a lot to learn from. I just gave the book that after I'm done, I gave it to my area director and I told him, you're reading that book and there is a lot of things that we can use today in our business because the trust in the team, it's a main thing. You cannot run any organization without a team and their trust because you can have 10 location or one location, but one person cannot do the job and run the hotels like our. You have to depend on each other and you have to trust each other for them to do the job. And I think the book was like wow, but some of the thing I was not doing. So it was a learning for me as well. So
Good. I'm glad to hear you enjoyed it, and we're gonna dive into some of those things in a minute. But Carla, speaking of knowing each other for 25 years, I think you and I have been working together for a long time, and you're past leader of our Spokane chapter and been on our board. And I think I even knew you when you were with Aztecas on the west side. But if you haven't
Yeah.
met Carla Barajas, she has the Aztecas in Spokane, and one of our own concepts in Tecate, and just an overall great leader person. Carla, thanks for joining us today. What do you think of the book?
Well, thank you for having me. I hate to say it, I'm kind of a pessimist sometimes. So when it started with trust, I was like, well, first you got to earn my trust. So I did the Anton thing and I flipped it upside down. And I wanted the accountability. I wanted all the commitment. I wanted all that. And then you could have my trust. But as I read through the book, I understood why they wanted to start with trust because you have to build on that to get to the other things. So it was interesting. I was a little skeptical at first to start with trust.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that, and let's dive into that a little bit. The previous podcast to this one, we started going into the book, and Anthony's classic error is like, let's get into conflict because operators are always going to want to talk about conflict. And what we found is it all starts with trust. And I did the same thing you did. In the last podcast, I thought I'd start out 5 dysfunctions of a team with conflict. And trust is so important in what we do and how we build it. Tina, when you're trying to build trust on your team in today's operations with the workforce we've got, was there a key lesson in the book or a key thing that you always try to work on when you're trying to build trust at your team?
some the one thing, it's like Carla said, I have a hard time when they're new, to give them something to do and not micromanage, so it's trusting them to say, okay, I'm going to give you this department and you're on your own. That's the one of the thing in the book I read, that when she just came in and didn't do nothing, and just observe, everybody. And if that was my employee doing, I would be the same thing. It's like, see, I don't know, I want to keep that person around. But it was eye opening to see how she was noticing everybody before she put herself to work. So I think that was a new learning. That's a new thing I learned.
And I think that's a really good example and something a lot of us struggle with, Chris, in today's workforce when turnover is maybe higher than we want it to be, and we're fighting to find new people, and we have to throw people in the deep end. Is there anything either from the book or broader that you coach us on, and how to bring in the new team members and grant them trust and get the ball rolling on the right foot?
Yeah, I think both of you make really important comments in relation to trust that we actually have to tackle, which is what do we even mean by trust? Because trust is one of those words like love or even strategy, where it just means so many different things based on how you use it. So we need to distinguish between the things like personal intimacy and relationships and friendships, which is not what we're talking about in the context of team. Although I think great friends do make great teams, but that's not the kind of trust we're talking about. In the context of work and teams, there's really two types of trust. One we're talking about and one we're not. One that we're not talking about is what we call predictive trust, which is I've worked with you long enough to be able to know that you're competent. When you say you're going to do something, you do it. In other words, you're reliable. So when I say I trust that person, what I typically mean is, in the context of predictive trust, is I've worked with you long enough to know when you say you're going to do something, you'll do it and you'll do it well. And so I can trust you to get the job done. Or I've worked with you long enough to know that you're unreliable. I don't trust you because when you say you're going to do something, it either doesn't get done or it's not at the quality that I would expect. So that we put that under this banner called predictive trust, which is the type of trust that you earn over time through experience. That's not the kind of trust we're talking about in the 5 dysfunctions of a team model. In the 5 dysfunctions of a team, we're talking about vulnerability-based trust, which is the type of trust that's given and not earned. It's given and can be broken, but not earned over time. It can be strengthened over time. But this is the type of trust where we're saying, starting with the leader, who the leader has to go first, it's simply the willingness to admit that I've made a mistake, admit that somebody else has a better idea than I have, admit when I need help, and not hide or be defensive when somebody has questions about things that are happening in my area. So in the context of 5 dysfunctions of a team, vulnerability-based trust is simply the willingness to be open to the fact that others might have better ideas or that I might have vulnerabilities and have a need for others to hold me to account, or I might be wrong about certain things, and I'm not defensive about that. So typically with teams, what I say is, you're struggling with trust when people don't easily admit mistakes and they're very defensive when people have questions about them. And the starting point is the leader. There is no team that can ever be more vulnerable and have higher trust than the leader demonstrates. And I think this is an important starting point for us in this conversation, because if you're a leader or a manager in an organization, what you have to understand is no matter how much you ask your team to be open and honest and be willing to admit mistakes and to be trusting of their peers, if they don't see you as the leader do it first, if you don't admit mistakes, if you don't admit when you need help, when you don't admit when somebody in the back of the house has a better idea than you as the leader or owner of the house, then team members will be reluctant to be that open as well. And so trust is something that is a practice starting with the leader to demonstrate I don't have all the answers and I need other people's help. And when I make mistakes, I'm quick to admit that and not be defensive about it. So understanding what we mean by trust is really critical around this, because I think to both of their points, if we confuse the terms, then we'll make it sound like it's actually something that takes longer than it needs to, when in reality, it actually can happen today. It's just hard.
Carla, what do you think about that? As a restaurant operators, a lot of times we are trained to be tough and not be vulnerable, and and yet as leaders, I think Chris makes some interesting points. So when you heard Chris think about it and you think about your own world, what are you pondering?
Well, in my perfect world that I used to live in, it was pretty easy. But now we get so many people with not the skills that we're desiring or the employment pool that we would like to have. It's harder to give them trust. It's harder to develop that because you're so busy training them to do the skills that you need to accomplish the task. They're not coming in with those skills.
That's right.
So it's taking longer for me to build that trust or even have that open communication to go forward a little bit.
Right.
It's taking a long time.
And this is where I would say the reliability is going to take time for them to prove that out, for sure. And that's where I would agree with you on that. However, what we could choose to say is the fastest way to help them learn is for them to feel like they're in an environment where their ability to admit that they're making mistakes and ask for help is welcomed and encouraged, which I bet you probably do that every day in the restaurant. But for new employees coming in on board, even more important to say, I make mistakes as a leader. You're going to make mistakes when you come on board. This is brand new for you. I will reward you faster when you ask for help and admit when you don't know what you're doing than trying to pretend like you do and trying to make it, because more mistakes will be made and ultimately our customers will be affected by that. And so I'd rather you admit when you make a mistake or admit when you don't know what to do, especially now at the early stage. And that's when we talk about a foundation of trust, that's what we mean. When a team member doesn't come to work and feel afraid of admitting that they need help with something because they don't know what to do. And you, I mean, both of you are veterans in onboarding new employees. You know that the faster they ask for help, the faster they're going to get better.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, you two are the pros on this one.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Tina, with so many new people coming into the industry, and I'm guessing your place is similar to what a lot of operators are experiencing, do you have any foundational conversations around owning mistakes or being vulnerable, or even, intentional demonstrations of your own vulnerability to try to encourage this? Or has reading this book caused any thoughts about things you might try moving forward?
So, with our staff, hospitality, it's not the evening staff and the audit, they work by themselves. So you have to trust them and you have to teach them to make their own decision, because at that time the general manager is not there, nobody's there, they're by themselves. And it's a 24/7 business. So when we train the leaders or train the staff, we do tell them, like you said, please don't make any decision that you think you're not sure of. Always pick up a call a GM, instead of making a mistake, let us help you fix it. So next time, if that scenario happens, you know exactly what to do, because we have to trust them to make that decision with the angry guest coming to the desk and there is nobody there to back them up, right? So we give them a power, to say, okay, we will comp you this, we will make this decision. So at the hotel, we have to train our staff saying that take a leadership and own up to it. And sometimes they'll mess up, they'll say something they're not supposed to say, or admit to something it's not a hotel's fault, and then the customer next day calling the general manager and they're more angry, right? So it's this is why there is a time, even you give them a power to do a lot of things, and sometimes they're like, okay, I'll give you the full night off just because we didn't have a coffee, so it's like just not having a coffee. You can just say, take something from the market instead of giving the full night off. So it's sometimes giving them a power and trust to do something, but it's a constant teaching, and having a lot of employees turnover it's teaching the leaders, and it's constant learning and trusting them to do the right thing. And we just tell them, I rather call your leader before make a mistake. So that's how we approach our employees.
Mm-hmm. One thing I would want to just tag on to that, because reliability, I think both of you are talking about so many new people coming on staff. And I think, when we're talking about vulnerability-based trust and quick to admit mistakes, we're not saying instead of developing reliability, because reliability is essential. We want to encourage this type of trust to accelerate reliability and skill development, not be in replace of. And what I mean by that is, because regularly I'll have leaders ask me, well, can you can you be too vulnerable? If somebody is walking around constantly saying, I made a mistake, I made a mistake, I made another mistake, I don't know what I'm doing. At some point where you don't have a trust problem, you have a reliability problem, you have a competency problem. And that doesn't mean that those people should stay in the organization just because they're willing to admit that they're making mistakes or don't have all the answers, because there's still more parts to the pyramid, which is we do need to get to commitment, accountability, and results. But at the foundation of all of this is what's so important is, and this was said at the beginning, that oftentimes leaders want to get to accountability and results and focus on the top parts of the pyramid. And it's almost like an iceberg where below the water, oftentimes we realize the problem we hit was not an accountability problem. It was a competency problem with somebody who was not open about where they needed help. And so I do think it's important for us, especially in environments where we're bringing on a lot of new people. The reason for this type of environment is to accelerate development of those employees, and not to have vulnerability and admission of weaknesses to be instead of developing skills and being accountable to the outcomes. It really should be an accelerator. And that's kind of the whole point of the 5 dysfunctional team model, is it should accelerate performance, not be something that becomes touchy-feely. I think this is where teamwork becomes a problem in a lot of organizations. It's a little too touchy-feely and not related to getting work done. And great teamwork, whether it's in a restaurant or at a hotel, just like on a sports field, it's about actually delivering the result you're there for. And in this industry, it's about the customers and their experience in our particular places are.
Well, and Chris, for me, it's so interesting how vulnerability and invulnerability sound like almost psychologist words and touchy-feely, but when you're vulnerable, how your team will rally around you. And when you're invulnerable, sometimes your team is afraid of you or doesn't want to call you out or wants to hide stuff from you. When I think of different times with my own team, I'm thinking one particular area where the team member for always was always right, always right, always right. I said, when you become vulnerable, your team's going to help you get better and rally around you and do more, and you'll have to do less all by yourself.
Right.
And when he experienced that, is when his breakthrough started happening, his true leadership started coming out. So it was real, but it sounded like being vulnerable, kind of this thing. Carla, you've got so many great young leaders in your company. When you're trying to teach a new manager, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to say, I don't know, to your team. How do you encourage those lessons so they can grow?
Well, sometimes I just tell them, make a call. And if it wasn't the right call, we'll discuss it, but just don't do nothing.
Right. I love that.
Sometimes they're like, well, I'll have my boss call you. Don't put it off. Something you could take care of right now, just take care of it. Mm-hmm. And if it wasn't the right call, we'll talk about it and work through ways to do it better in the future, but just at least acknowledge it and do something. I really try to perpetuate that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's the right call.
Right. That to me that's what creating a high trust environment looks like, is, Carla, what you just said. Make the best decision you can in the moment for the good of the customer. If it's the wrong one, we'll figure it out. But we all hate walking into that experience where the person won't make a call because they're afraid of what their manager will say. It's like the worst thing. But and you could tell the difference when you go somewhere and you could tell these people aren't afraid to do something in the best interest of the customer. They know their managers have their back or will help them if they made a mistake. That's a powerful tool in building high trust.
Yeah.
I love that.
Tina, how about you when you're bringing in the new blank, right? System manager, floor manager, rooms manager, and you're trying to show them it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to let your team see you be vulnerable, because you'll be a stronger leader when you do. Do you have any tricks that other operators could learn from to help grow people?
I lead by example. I always sometimes tell them, I mess up on a lot of things, so I've been in this industry for 30 years and I learn something new every day. So don't be afraid to make a mistake, and we'll figure it out together, and maybe you'll learn something from me and I'll learn something from you. So giving them trust, saying it's okay, and having a GM, they do need to deal with not only housekeepers, employee, front desk, and the guest, so it's a lot of time they need to be saying it's okay, if I give them free nights, if I refund something, they should not be vulnerable to say, oh, I'm gonna get yelled at by the management, so I always said, in end of the day, make sure when the guest leaves the hotel, take care of the problem. Don't leave the guest and the guest is angry, and then they're going on the TripAdvisor on that just makes it more bad. So I usually give not only my GMs or head department or employees said, take care of it before they leave. Take care of the problem before they leave. They should not be leaving the hotels angry. That makes it even harder. So giving them that, I think they appreciate that, and I have not gone back and tell them, why did you do that? You shouldn't have done it. Sometimes they have overly done it. Then I go back and said, next time you should have done this, but not done this. So that's how I teach my leaders and my employee.
So we talked a lot about teaching trust. For let me switch gears a little bit. I love our industry because we have so much diversity in industry, right? Both, I'm guessing both of you probably have at least three languages spoken within your different businesses. I'm guessing that cooks don't always know how to talk to the front of the house, and I'm guessing that the rooms and the front desk and the facilities, even though might all speak one language, it doesn't seem like it very often. And they come from different backgrounds and successes and educations. And getting the teams to trust each other when they're coming from all these different places within the Northwest. And yet we need them to work as a team and trust each other. Examples that you've learned from or can provide about how you've had to build trust within your teams, so you don't have to be involved all the time, and the front desk can talk to the rooms and make sure that things are going well. Tina, I'll let you go first this time. Any lessons on how you build trust within your own team?
I do have a lot of different speaking, employee and not English speaking employee, and I only speak English and my native language. So, lot of time you will hire somebody and they'll say, I do not get along. I don't want to work with this person. This person is hostile. That does happens. Usually, I will tell my GM and say, let's get into the put them both in a one room. That's what I do. Try to work it out, and I always get a translator and see if they can work, because a lot of time it's miscommunication. What they're saying and what other person is understanding, the tone, because they're from different country, the tone is coming out is a different, and somebody's taking it wrong. So having somebody to translate that language, that does help in my industry, because I have a lot of employees that speak the same language who can speak the English. So I'm fortunate about that. And if we don't make it work, and what I try to tell them, if you cannot work that with that person, we do have other hotels. So I will tell them to move somewhere else. I always I have this motto at Alko, that if you are not happy where you're working at, please don't come to work, because I want you to come to work happy, because it shows when you're not happy, when you're walking on the hallways or at the front desk, it shows on your face that you're not happy. So that's the one motto I have used for last 20 years. Whenever I hire them, I tell them, I want you to be happy working at the Alco hotels. If you're not happy, I have open door policy in my office. We'll always talk. If that doesn't work, we'll put you somewhere that you will be happy, because I want everybody to come to hotel saying, I love going to work, instead of I used to work places that I dread waking up in the morning, and I did not want it to go to work because so I don't want my employees to feel that way. And we have employees who's been with our hotels for over 12 years. Today is one of the GMs is 12 years anniversary, so that's what I like to do. If you work with everybody as a team, be happy, and there will be the conflict happens everywhere, even conflict happens in our home too, right? But we always like to talk it out and say, if you're not a good fit, I think you shouldn't work for us.
I think happiness is a good thing to build common ground on, right?
Yes.
I would hope. So I think that's really interesting. Carla, I don't know if you've had the struggle, but in my family restaurants, the kitchen and the front of the house had some pretty dramatic moments, and we always had to encourage trust, and that we're all trying hard. Any great examples of how you've seen trust get built on your team between those two entities, and or when you have a problem, how you start getting it back to a good trust level?
Well, so some background. My husband is the kitchen and I am the front of the house.
I wondered if
And,
you're going to go there.
and we have had conflict, even though we have complete trust. I have complete trust that he will make sure everything goes well in the back of the kitchen. And he has complete trust that I will do the front of the house. Moving forward, you know, with a lot of our long-term employees, they've just developed really respectful bonds above and beyond cultural lines and embrace difference rather than be offended by it. Like at first they couldn't understand him, and now they're learning different simple words, and everybody's happy that they can speak a few words of Spanish, and that's great. And then other people pick up on it, and it kind of ignites and just follows through the whole organization, I think. Yeah. I got some bilingual people that didn't start out bilingual.
Well, I think
go, Chris.
I was going to say there's two things that both of you say that are really critical in relation to trust. And having worked with teams for as long as I have in every industry that I have, you both articulated two critical things. One is, outside of the leader's role modeling, the first and most important thing that we can do is people just need to understand each other better. They need to get to know each other. And I love in your instance, Carla, literally learn to speak each other's language. But I think, we use this term with a lot of leadership teams called attribution error. It's this misattribution of intent or motive to people you don't know very well. And when you have low trust with them, you're quick to assign negative intent and motives to people based on behavior that you perceive to be negative. And so somebody is aggressive or loud or quiet or withdrawn, and people who don't know them will falsely ascribe negative intent to them. And they'll bring that to the manager and complain, this person's aggressive, I can never talk to them. Well, you may not know that they might be dealing with something stressful at home, that they just made a big mistake and they're feeling they're hard on themselves. And so one of the most important things you can do as a leader is help each other get to know each other better. And, with a lot of teams that we work with, even executive teams, we'll have them do like a personal histories exercise where, for some of these leaders, the first time they've ever gotten to know any information about their colleagues that they've worked with for years, about where they grew up and their family life outside of work and other things that affect who they are as a person. But the number of times I've seen walls and barriers come down between people when they realize this person had other unique challenges. Now I understand them better. And now I can understand their behavior differently than how I was interpreting it. So that's an important aspect of it. And then Carla, I think you brought up a really important point, which is high trust doesn't mean no conflict. And you use your husband and your relationship with your husband as a good example of that. And I use a similar example with my wife. In fact, the more trust I've developed with her over the years, the more open and honest the more conflict there is. And I think this is an important thing is a high trust environment isn't doesn't mean there's an absence of conflict. In fact, oftentimes when people are withholding and there's artificial harmony and they're not engaging in conflict, that's usually an indicator that there's probably low trust. And it doesn't mean there's outright broken trust, but it could just be our people don't know each other well enough, so they're not communicating enough. And when there's conflict, that's usually an indicator that, you know, there's negative conflict, which is not productive. But when there's productive conflict and you have employees who are trying to figure out how to do the right thing by a customer or for the organization or the restaurant, that's an indicator that, okay, I think the relationships are getting better. They're starting to problem solve together. They're starting to wrestle with the tensions between the front of the house and the back of the house type issues. And so I think understanding that the presence or absence of conflict is an important indicator for a leader to the level of trust that there is amongst our people. And we want to have team members who, in good spirits and for the best interest of the organization, get in good, vigorous debates with each other. That's a good sign, not a bad sign.
Well, that's how we solve problems, right? And then hopefully that not every problem has to come to us as the leaders, right? If everything that goes wrong in the hotel or the restaurant has to come through Tina or Carla,
right?
Then you guys don't get to sleep at night.
Nope.
Which is no fair. Tina, looks like you have a thought.
You know, it's so funny you said that your husband is a kitchen, and I the same thing. It's a family business for us too, and my husband does the development and building, and he does the maintenance, and I operate the hotels. And you're so right, you know, we do conflict, and I think we have argument 3 or 4 times, not about us, but it's about either employee or it's about the
Right.
GM or something. But you know, we do trust each other, but our thought doesn't always match up, you know. But then we try to meet halfway, you know, and to work together. And it's so right, in a family business you have to do that, you know. So
That's exactly right.
Well, let me talk a little bit about some of the why of what we're having these podcasts, in that we're going to be short workforce for the next 5 years. And actually, it's going to get worse each year until Gen Xers start
Happy
retiring.
Friday. We're recording this on a Friday.
and our businesses run on tight margins. Oh, they just do. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have to be competitive wages and those things. But we want to win on having a great environment, a great culture. I love working for Carla. I love working for Tina. This is like family. This is fun. Those kind of environments are going to prevent somebody from jumping for a quarter more an hour, right? Rather than going to a place where they're miserable and people are screaming at each other and the owners are a dictator, which means we're going to have to lead differently than my father did. We're going to have to lead in a way that engages and moves from there. And so if you're advising someone getting into the business on creating a great culture, and Tina, my counterpart in Oregon, brags about you a lot. You and I haven't had a lot of chance to get to know each other, but he talks about the culture and your family business. And Carla, you and I know each other well. And it's kind of funny. You opened with, I wanted to get to the other end and not the trust side. But you're so naturally vulnerable and are humble. You draw people to you because that trust you extend us by being vulnerable.
Thank you.
and so you probably overlook it because it comes natural to you. If you're trying to coach people getting into the industry about creating these trust environments, what are the first couple of things you want them to think about as they come into the industry? Did I ask too big of a question?
Well, I think one thing I try to instill in people is that this is a career path. You know, I have people that start out as hostess or bussers and work their way up and work their way through college. Excuse me. And they can keep it as a part-time job, you know, farther on and earn a good income.
Right.
I mean, I put myself through college and I'm still in the restaurant business 36 years later. But you have to like it. If you don't like this industry, then don't start. That's the truth, honestly. Did I answer your question?
I think so. Chris, do you want to do any follow-up on that?
No, I agree. I think, the restaurant industry is tough. I mean, there's got to be very few other industries that are as competitive and relentlessly competitive. It's something about the hospitality industry, because I think it's so customer experience centric, that it's relentlessly competitive. And I think this is why a high trust environment is so important, because I think, Carla, you said this, and Tina, you said this in various ways as well. If the staff don't come to work and feel great coming to work and feel happy at work and like what they're doing and don't feel empowered to make decisions and just do things, and they don't feel like they're living under a watchful eye waiting for them to make a mistake, then people like me who come have an exponentially better experience. And so in these tough environments, when staffing is going to be tight and, all the other factors that are now happening in our economy, you want to know that every customer who walks in your doors is going to get at least a great experience, if not an exceptional one. And you definitely want it to be above what they expected. And it starts with the attitudes and the interactions of your frontline staff. And so when people come to work and it's a trusted environment, it's just different. It's just a different place. Even, and it's not about, is it a 5-star versus a 1-star? Because I've been to plenty 5-star places that I'll never go back to because the experience was horrible. And I've been to plenty, quote, 1-star locations. The people were just incredible. They were friendly, down to earth, great to talk to. The food was good, and it was exceptional. And so in a world where we chase status, I think the most competitive thing is really the human interaction. And that's nowhere more important than in the hospitality industry. I think that's true.
One of the hardest lessons I've learned in my career is, on the flip side, is to trust my guests also. If they told me I did something wrong, and then I go to my staff has all kinds of excuses as to why whatever happened. Yeah. But I always look back and say, okay, this person took the time out of their life and their day to let me know that we dropped the ball.
Right.
So let me give them the courtesy of trusting that their account was pretty accurate. And my staff might be trying to cover something up, not intentionally, but maybe, things happen. But I always thank my guests. Like, if we drop the ball, I want you to come back. I want you to trust us. I want you to come back and just have a good time with us. And I reach out to all my guests. I don't care what they complain about, even if I think that they're not really being 100% honest, or what happened didn't happen. But I still go and reach out to them and say, hey, thanks for letting me know. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah.
I
love that. I had an experience 2 years ago, or before COVID. So I guess now that would have been like 3 years ago, 4 years, 10 years ago.
Lost years.
Lost years. Where my wife and I had just come off a business trip. I was really tired, and I told my wife, let's go have dinner. So I took her to this really nice Italian place. They were super busy. We weren't dressed particularly fancy, because we were tired, and I was in very casual clothes, and we sat there in the lobby, and nobody, the woman host, who I could tell was the manager. There was no host. And the manager came up and took our name, and then we sat there for 20 minutes and nobody talked to us, and we just left. So I did what most customers do and went on Yelp and sent this polite email. I was so harsh. I was so frustrated, and I was tired. And I intended on never going back. And the manager wrote back on Yelp, did exactly what you said, and actually just apologized and just said, it was so stressful. We had 4 people out. I was stressed. I'm so sorry. I hope you would give us another chance. And this is where you wish probably more customers would be more trusting and open with staff and give a chance. Her response totally changed my attitude towards that restaurant. We went back, and we've been back ever since. And it was one of those things where the restaurant had a bad day. It wasn't typical service, and and her willingness to respond to me as a customer earned my business back. And thankfully so, because it's a great place for us to go to, you know. But that response, not every place does that. And I think you're right, Carla.
Yeah.
That's an important thing to do with customers.
Our hospitality, I think, is the same thing. Something goes out, the Yelp, TripAdvisor, Google, everything. So we tell our general manager in an AGM, same thing. We have a lot of step command. It's not only me. So it's whatever, if it's a good or bad, we always tell them to reply back to them. Then they know they took a time out to go in there to write a review being a good. So we don't only reply to the good one, we also reply to the bad ones. And I think then they said, yeah, we did look at it, we try to fix it. So I think sometimes not everybody's going to have a good day. We have it when you have a 80 or 90 checkouts and one person is doing it, and you have 200 guests in a hotel with the one person running the desk. They'll mess up. I have done that before too, and at that time I'm like, if you with one more guest come to the front desk for asking for a spoon, I'm gonna just lose it.
I know. Don't you kind of wish in your industry every customer was mandated to write a review, because it's only the 1 out of 100 who writes the negative.
It's like I did all 99 right, but the one I messed up, they're writing the review.
They're writing a review. I know.
Well, like so many of us, even when we get a whole bunch of good ones, we only read the bad ones. But I also think that, and this is why I think I think Carla, it was interesting when you started. I was like, I was going to challenge your point of view, but I think it's actually really interesting that we want to get to the conflict, the accountability, and the results. But if we don't trust each other to engage in conflict, we can't get to the conflict. And I keep training my team. Granted, I'm Greek. I'm born for conflict. Started arguing when I was 2. Conflict is where the greatness comes from, because that's where you get all the opinions on the table. You learn all the lessons, and then you can start making a commitment to get better and hold each other accountable for better to get to those results. But when you don't trust each other, you can't start having that conflict. And whether it's you don't trust the guests because they had alternative motives, or if you don't trust the kitchen or the room staff or someone from a different culture, we all want to do a good job. We all want to engage in what I call the Japanese kaizen, right? The constant improvement. Our competitors are always improving. And yet without trust, we can't get to that conflict, which can make us great. And it's such an odd thing to think about, but it's so tangible. Tina, we're closing in on our time. We try to keep these podcasts to about a half hour. And so give us your closing thoughts, first impression of the book, and or for aspiring professionals in hospitality who are trying to grow their leadership and get better each day. What would you hope they took away from either the book or the podcast today?
From the book, lot of things we're doing, the SWOT, in this business, you have to understand everybody's strength and weakness to see where they would fit better at what position. And I loved the book, so that I'm having every single GM and my head housekeeper, everybody, I want them to read it. And there is audio available too. So the who don't have a time, they can also read it at the front desk. And there is a lot of takeaway I learned, and I like to put that in my business as well, that if you don't trust and if you don't learn each other's strength and weakness, you cannot work together as a team. So I think every person is unique, and every person has a different strength and weakness, and you learn that. I think from the book, that's what I learned. It's like somebody might thrive at one thing and they might not be good at the other thing. So but how you can put them at our organization and make the hotel industry better.
Thank you. Carla, what about you? What was your takeaway either from the podcast you hope people will remember moving forward? or the book?
One thing after I read the book, I was on vacation when I read it. I started mentally reevaluating a lot of my key people. Like, were they in the right position? Maybe that person should go over here. Maybe that person would be better over here. And I just started, which I hadn't sat down and really reevaluated my organization in a long time, because I've just been keeping my doors open, just kind of, okay, we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this. Well, we're in this. We're not getting through nothing. We're in it. So it inspired me to just take a step back and kind of reevaluate my organizational structure. So it was really refreshing for me to do, not just from the trustworthiness. I went through the whole gambit of it.
That's great. Chris, any follow up on either one of those, or and if not, tie it all together for us.
Well, I appreciate both of your experience and what you brought to this, because I think the two of you are evidence that, any leader who cares about having a great customer experience, whether it's a hotel or restaurant or anything, trust will be something that you'll naturally have to start to work on and improve in your organization. And so both of you are role models and examples, and I love that. And I think the thing probably to understand that's important as it relates to trust is most people think of trust as a very touchy-feely thing in an organization. And they think of it in terms of, do we all get along and like each other? And that's definitely an important part of it. But I think as leaders, we have to understand that a low trust environment is a very inefficient and costly organization to run. And so trust, in that sense, trust has a very material effect on a business. I just flew in from Denver yesterday, and my colleague and I were talking on the way to the airport. He has this new thing where he has this access to the clear line at the airport. I have TSA, and both of us were commenting on how much money we're now spending to go through an airport the way we used to be able to do it before 9/11. And and when you think about the airport and think it took one action to break trust and all of this bureaucracy and cost that was put in this system because of a moment of mistrust. And that happens every single day in so many of our organizations. We end up spending a lot of money and putting a lot of process and bureaucracy into our systems because we have low trust, and we don't know what people are going to do with a little bit of autonomy and freedom. And so I think when you're bringing new people on board, you have to manage them closely and you have to manage them well until they can develop some of those competencies. But I think as leaders, we have to understand a high trust organization is just a better functioning organization. And not only is it better functioning operationally and more cost effective, it produces a better outcome for customers. And in a competitive workforce environment, it's just a place people want to work. People want to work in a place where they know they're trusted and they can trust their peers and their managers. And so I think it's important to understand that high trust environment is not just a nice thing to do. It's actually a critical strategic decision any leader is going to make for their organization. And not one that, whether you acknowledge it or not, is having an effect on your business. And I think what I appreciate about the two of you is, without even thinking, I'm going to do this on purpose, you've actually created better organizations as a result of fostering higher trust than just avoiding it altogether and having organizations that are more inefficient and ineffective and poor experiences. So it's critical. It's important. Everybody can do it. But I would say it's still hard. No matter how much you believe in it, it's just hard work. And that's an important responsibility that leaders carry.
Well, Chris, to you at the table group, thank you so much for bringing all these concepts forward. I will tell you, I was between being a director and then the CEO, I didn't read this book till several years in my leadership. And I had ignored these things. And I don't think the organization really started flowing until I really understood how important trust that leads to good conflict that then gets the commitment, accountability, and results that we need is. And so I really want to pass on my appreciation to you to be here with all these podcasts and help us get better. Tina and Carla, thanks for your leadership in the Northwest and hospitality. The industry is not going to go anywhere without really strong leaders, and we appreciate you very much. And so thanks for taking your time today to help others improve. And I hope you both have an incredible summer and find lots of employees who love working for you. And we come out of this thing even stronger come the fall. So thanks again for being here today. I hope everyone has a great month, and I trust we'll see you soon.
Yes.
Thank
we'll
you.
Get through this together.
I like it.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for listening.